Hello and welcome to Türkiye Talks. This week we are going to talk about desecration of Quran in Sweden and its repercussions, especially with regards to NATO enlargement. As you know, probably a right-wing, far-right extremist politician burned Quran, the holy book of Muslims, and it caused outrage. And this action took place in front of Turkish Embassy in Sweden. Of course, this was regarded as a great provocation in Muslim countries, but especially in Turkey as the venue of this desecration action. Also, Turkey is holding the key of Sweden's accession to NATO. I'd like to, we are joined by Mehmet Ali Uğur from Yalova University. Professor, thank you very much for joining. And Kadir Üstün, as always, my partner in this program. Welcome both. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Professor Uğur. Why this kind of activities is taking place again? Because before 5-10 years ago, this kind of actions provoking Muslims were more common. We remember cartoons, we remember statements from even the Pope who passed away a couple weeks ago, Ratzinger. But it started again. Do you think there is a reason for that, especially this time of these days?
Thank you for asking this question. Well, as you pointed out, this is not something new. And unfortunately, I regret to say that we know from here or there that somewhere in the world, probably people are just collecting Qurans or burning secretly. But probably they don't even show that they are burning Qurans. But this time around, unfortunately, what is being done right in front of Turkish Embassy is a clear act of, how can I put it, an unfriendly kind of action, at least to say this much. Otherwise, why would someone come from Denmark all the way up to Stockholm and just mention about what he's going to do and just publicize it and get some protection from the Swedish police officers so that he can do this heinous, abominable crime? I understand it as a crime in front of cameras, so that it can create even more reaction from the Turkish community. This is obvious. I mean, he just wants to have a very high amount of reaction and some, let's say, disturbing kind of views coming from Turkey, so that they can portray Turkish community, Turkish population as a not so nice or not so friendly kind of community, so that they can apply some sort of extra pressure on Turkish population, and of course through this pressure, of course, they would like to in a way change the policies of the Turkish government about the prospective membership of Sweden and Finland. This is first I can say about what I observed in the last few days.
Yeah, the incident has two dimensions. One is targeting Islam and Muslims, their faith, and the other is its relation to Turkey and NATO. Kadir, what do you think, which was the main motive behind this action, this desecration of the Quran?
Well, obviously, they're trying to provoke a reaction from the Turkish side. And I think there might be another dimension where this individual is known to have this kind of history, and in this case, it serves the interests of people, countries, let's say, Russia, who may not want NATO to enlarge, and that could be another dimension. It's hard to know the exact, of course, motivations and exact motives of this individual, but it's very hard to know the exact motives and who is supporting this individual. But the more problematic issue is, of course, how Sweden has been handling these kind of events. So if this was a one-time thing, right? Turkey understands that it's a provocation. If this was just one incident, and if negotiations between Turkey and Sweden were going well, I think this could have been handled. But Sweden were already signaling, Swedish authorities were already signaling to the Turkish side that, they were willing to do certain things. And they're still talking about freedom of expression and freedom of assembly, which are obviously noble goals, and all countries must ensure that, right? Including Turkey and others. But here, the question is not that. The question is whether you as a country are caring about the national security concerns of a future fellow NATO ally. And that's the problem part. So this incident added to a whole host of sort of complaints and requests that were not met by the Swedish authorities. That were, that was Turkey's concerns. So the broader question that it touches upon is whether both NATO and future allies are going to talk about terrorism seriously, and if they're going to talk about something like Islamophobia in a serious way. Because, certain expressions are, freedom of assembly is restricted. For instance, if you were to, I think, march down the streets of Stockholm or other European capitals supporting something like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, I don't think, this would be the reaction. It would be restricted, it would be prevented, it would be at the very least monitored, and see, you would try to see what, acts of violence could come from this and what kind of organizations are behind this, etc. So that kind of lack of sensitivity on the side of the Swedish authorities, that's been bothering Turkey. So it's not like Turkey is outraged by one incident and then just walks away from the table. So I think there is a bit of a problem by especially the Swedish authorities, that they're having a hard time at least conceptualizing how they need to look at these kind of activities inside their country. You can't just wash it away by saying this is freedom of expression. So they need to think harder and more deeply about this.
May I add one thing just to clarify the situation? Well, these days, I just observed that on many channels in social media, especially certain British people, I observed that they're trying to portray the reaction from Turkey because of the burning of Quran incident in a different way. They say that, well, is Turkey asking the Swedish people to amend their laws or introduce some sort of blasphemy laws, some sort of, these kind of reactions they have. And this is definitely just trying to serve to some kind of a goal to, portray Turkey in such a bad way. After all, I've never heard from any Turkish authority saying that, Sweden should just change their law or reintroduce some historical kind of laws about blasphemy, so on and so forth. The reaction is definitely something expected from the wider Muslim community. It's not only coming from Turkey, by the way. And we observe that the reactions are coming from many different parts of the world with overwhelming Muslim population. So that's going to be evaluated by the Muslim world, definitely. For Turkey, as far as I know, probably as far as we all know, not harboring terrorists or giving them safe havens or providing some kind of an asylum this is definitely not the Turkey is just preferring about Swedish authorities. The Turkish bottom line in terms of Turkish security is just don't provide safe havens for the terrorists, and just return, extradite certain specific names, just like what we do. I mean, we have good faith relations with all our allies. As far as I know, we have bilateral treaties, and according to that, whatever, let's say, the American side or the British side or other allies, let's say, designate a group, let's say, as terrorists, we try not to just protect them. Not only we protect, but also if we catch them, we certainly give them back to the authorities so that they can just give them a trial in the court of law. But unfortunately, when the same kind of reaction, same kind of standard comes from the Turkish side, somehow our Western allies believe that their values, their laws are superior to the Turkish ones. Unfortunately, this is not something acceptable to any standard. Any respected country would definitely not tolerate such kind of double standards between theirs versus ours.
And also maybe we should mention that Turkey was targeted. This incident took place in front of Turkish Embassy. So obviously Turkey was specifically chosen by these people. Maybe we should go a little bit into the geopolitical consequences of that. We know that Finland and Sweden are in the same basket. They want to be NATO members, and they have been treated equally. And the enlargement of NATO with these two countries were in a package. But recently, Finland is trying to distance itself from Sweden. They say in the beginning they used to say, we would go together, but now we hear different voices from Finland. Do you think this will cause a separation between these two countries? Do you think Turkey will let Finland and keep Sweden in the queue in front of the doors of NATO? What is your opinion on that?
Is this a good question for me, first of all? Should I? Okay. If you don't mind, I want to shed light, just brief light to very recent history. I'm not sure if people like history, but I definitely learn a lot from history, even though I don't want to live in history. But just by looking at the borders and the geography, Finland just lives side by side with the Russians and their independence, even though 200 years ago it was the Swedish territory. After the end of Napoleonic Wars, Sweden had to give way or cede all Finland to Russians. For 100 years, Finland was part of Russia. I mean, of course, not the current Russia, but Imperial Russia. Only after the Bolshevik Revolution, then it was possible for the Finnish people to gain their independence, but at certain cost, obviously. And how do we know that? Well, after World War II, they had to give their only northern port. As far as I remember, it was Petsamo. Now it is Pechenga, the name of the place, which was giving only outlet to the Finnish people to the northern seas. Other than that, as we know, the whole Baltic region was under control of the Soviet Union until the collapse of the Union and the Baltic countries gained independence. So independence. Why am I giving all these details? This is very obvious for the Finnish people that they had to give away so much territory to Russians because they were not able to withstand the pressure coming from the Russian side. They even gave the city of Viipuri, now it's Viborg, or the southern city is now which is Estonia. Once it was part of the same union, as far as I remember. So because of that, they have a very long common border with the Russians. So obviously they feel the protection, the need for protection from the Russians more imminent, more urgently. They feel the urgency compared to the Swedish. So that's why they would like to be separated. This is one reason. This is the geographic reason. Another reason is that, again, in terms of population, in terms of political the tradition and so on, the Sweden is more, let's say, in the spotlight when it comes to providing, protection for the dissidents. They call themselves dissidents for many political reasons, or the terrorist groups, etc. So that's why they just don't want to be facing the same difficulties from the Turkish side, especially. So they want to be separated. But from my vantage point, what I see is this. I mean, probably Turkey will not do it easily, just simply because they have this geographic difference versus historical ones. But when it comes to showing the true intent, the good faith, showing that Turkey is one of the prominent and most strongest members of the NATO alliance, it might be possible for the Turkish side to reconsider the Finnish request, just to show that, okay, we have good intentions, but unfortunately for Sweden, unfortunately we don't see any kind of cooperation effort about the red lines of the Turkish Republic. Maybe in that case, Turkish side can apply different kind of standard. I don't mean to lower the standards of membership, but at least clearing the way for the Finnish part, simply because they are just lying side by side with the Russians. This is possibly what can happen well, at least not in the short term, but maybe in the near future, let's say.
Kadir, what is your take on this? Do you think now Turkey will treat Finland and Sweden separately, or will keep both of them waiting?
Well, actually, when Foreign Minister was here, Turkish Foreign Minister was in Washington, D.C. last week, he kind of alluded to the fact that Turkey does already have big problems with Finland's membership, but it was these two countries that wanted to make it a package, that Turkey is handling these negotiations accordingly. So I think it might be more of a matter of Finland's decision, and Finland and Sweden's, something between the two countries about if they want to separate their application. If we remember, when they applied for a fast track membership after Ukraine was invaded by the Russians, and they wanted it to be treated together. They wanted it to be together. So that's why Turkey has been raising the terrorism issue, and people who are, either affiliated with PKK, fundraising, recruiting in these countries, or conducting political activities. Also, there are some people who are implicated in the coup attempt in Turkey. By Turkish law, it is a terror organization. So Turkey is insisting about the Swedish authorities to reassure Turkey that they're doing the best they can in terms of going after these terror groups or people who are affiliated with terror groups. And on top of that, this recent incident happened. Remember, just I think a week prior to that, there were these demonstrations in Turkey, and really they burned some sort of image of President Erdogan. Remember, these activities, there was outrage in Turkey, but Turkey has been patient until after this Quran incident, before Turkey said, okay, we are going to shelve these negotiations. So I think it would be wise for these countries not to underestimate the outrage, right? When there's outrage, again, I don't want to make bad comparisons, but when Western journalists were killed, in a savage way by ISIS in Iraq and Syria, there was legitimate outrage in the West. And that resulted in actually military action, a lot of support to the, groups that were going to fight ISIS. And one of them was a direct national security threat to Turkey. So all that process happened. When there's outrage in Turkey or Islamic world, that shouldn't be underestimated. That's the other thing. I just want to note, by the way, that there was a very good response by Turkey, because at the exact place that Quran burning incident happened, Turkish imams actually sat down to read Quran, just coupled. So that was a good also thing we should note. It's not just anger that's coming from Muslims and Turkey, but I think the negotiations realistically were not going to result in something concrete until this summer. I believe there's in May or June there's some sort of NATO summit. If Turkey moved forward and approved their applications earlier, right? That really needed that needed some serious action by especially Swedish authorities. It didn't happen, and on top of it, this latest incident happened. So I think it's going to be into the summer, and Swedish have especially a lot of homework to do, especially because there's the election season in Turkey in May 14. There are elections in Turkey. So, but the separation of membership for these two countries, I think it's more up to them than Turkey. Turkey will probably have an easier time approving Finland, but not so much with Sweden.
Let's talk a little more about the crisis which actually initiated Finland and Sweden to seek NATO membership. That's the war in Ukraine. In a month, we will witness the first year of the war when it started. Some people expected a quick end within a few weeks, but now we are in the 11th month of it, and February we will see the first year, and there is no end in sight. But very interesting and important developments are taking place. Germany decided to send tanks to Ukraine, more promises for armament of Ukrainian army. We read from newspapers, from the US, from other countries, and the reaction of Russia is very harsh. Sergei Lavrov threatened all the countries who are supporting Ukraine in this manner. So they are not going to let, as he said, the arms supply to reach Ukraine. What kind of impact, Professor Uğur, will it make? How do you evaluate the decision of Germany? I don't know if you had chance to see Sergei Lavrov's statements criticizing Germany and other NATO members. What should we expect in the coming weeks and months in the Ukrainian field?
Years ago, I remember just reading an article quite a long time ago, and I didn't quite understand. I was pretty young by then. It was just calling Ukraine as a torn country. It was a torn country between East and West. And this is, I think, how to understand this article years ago. And I don't want to say I told you so in the future, but unfortunately, I'm afraid that the war is not going to end pretty soon. Why? Because what we observe currently is that the Russians will not just secure a very clear, decisive victory. This is one thing. And another thing that the Ukraine will not able to save its country completely and just kick the Russians back to their international borders. This is another fact. This is another thing I see. And so from this, well, there is kind of a stalemate. I mean, this day, while the Russian side can push a little bit farther, and another day, the Ukrainian side, supported militarily by the Western allies, can push a little bit back. So this is going to be something like this. Well, but the outcome is this. I mean, I don't see that there is a war between Russia and Ukraine, but in reality, the war is taking place between Russia and the allies of the American allies. So what this 11-month and ongoing war is just showing us that clearly whatever the United States is has been demanding or just dreaming about is becoming true. So we know that after being defeated horribly, terribly, just crushed in 2 world wars, Germany would be the last country to just who wants to see such a war, an ongoing war in eastern part of the country, let's say. And we've been observing so much pressure from the British, from the American side, from the countries bordering Ukraine and the historical allies like Poland and so on. And unfortunately, at the end, the German side had to just agree with them. So they started to send the tanks, Leopard tanks, together with the other countries using German tanks in their inventory. So unfortunately, this is going to make the war continue even further into history, further into the future. Excuse me. So this is not something good. This is not something. I don't have a positive future, at least in the near future, and probably this is going to end with either Russians to accept that the country is not as powerful as in the past, and it's going to open a new era of geopolitical realities. Otherwise, I don't see any good future for the Ukrainian people, unfortunately.
Kadir, you wrote in your article in a Turkish paper, you are writing weekly comments on especially international affairs from Washington. And you said while Russians are preparing for a spring offensive, you say Biden has to manage a tank crisis, and if he doesn't do that, if he can't do that, maybe he may lose his leadership in this process, the US. Can you talk a little more about that? Do you think because of this tank issue, because of this arms supply to Ukraine, do you think the US leadership can be harmed globally or in NATO or in East Europe? What is in your mind?
Thank you, Bora. What I was trying to say is that, Germany, we've discussed this many times, Bora, you and I, in detail, in this program. Germany started out pretty, careful, hesitant. And then eventually the US was able to mobilize the European allies, NATO allies. Turkey helped a lot. All these countries helped a lot, especially because Zelensky was, able to fight. Ukrainian army was able to fight. And now it's the 11th month. It largely depends on, like Professor Uğur indicated, it depends on the Western help, how long this is going to last. There's been some talk about, how to get to the end. What is the sort of final outcome? But between the Russian and Ukrainian positions, there's a large difference in terms of what their demands are. They both say we're ready for negotiations, but their positions are so far apart that there's no realistic sort of route to peace. So when I saw this tank debate, I noticed that, the German defense minister is very fresh. He's like, he's been in this position only 6 days now. He was appointed January 19th. He's a former, minister. He was a politician close to Schroeder. Schroeder is known to be close to Russia. This Pistorius, Boris Pistorius, was also a member of Russian-German friendship group in their local parliament, I believe. So anyway, long story short, I thought maybe if Germany is starting to sort of waver again, like they were already hesitant and they don't want to be a party who is not just supplying the tanks, but who is actually producing the parts to maintain it, etc. So basically they would be in a position to be the country feeding the war from the western side, and that would put them basically in direct opposition to Russia, and they would be their fighting counterpart. And their condition that was leaked to the press was U.S. should send M1 Abrams tanks, and the U.S. was saying these tanks are going to take a long time to get there. They burn too much gas. Maintenance is difficult. We need to train Ukrainians. It will take a long time. So there's about 2,000 tanks, Leopard 2 tanks in Europe that could be easily, some of them, deployed to Ukraine. So that was a debate, and that could have been a major crack if Germany was saying, okay, you know what, we need to be much more careful from now on. But today, just today, I believe, the German chancellor announced that they were actually going to send the tanks, just following the news that U.S. was also send their tanks, even if it takes too long. Long story short, the alliance strategy to support Ukraine is not like 100% united alliance. There are difficulties, there are differences of opinion, there are, countries like Poland who is really pushing hard to push back against Russia. They are ready to send tanks. Finland said they were going to send tanks if Germany allowed it because they're the producers. I don't want to make this too long, but the point is the alliance that's supporting Ukraine could have issues like this in the future as well. And it's going to be up to the Biden administration, President Biden, to ensure that alliance remains united. But I think just like we've seen in this kind of tank crisis like this, Biden is going to do a lot more. He's going to have to show the alliance the end somehow. Like, how do we get there? And this is in response to, of course, Russians are preparing for a spring offensive, and now West wants to empower the Ukrainians to be able to resist that. But the assessment of Professor Uğur is correct that in that case, we're going to see what we've seen over the past 11 years, a prolonged, protracted conflict. And of course, the next fear is whether if Russia cannot get any kind of convincing victory on the ground, are they going to double down and use some sort of, weapons of mass destruction on the field? Or are they going to say, okay, we are defeated and pull out? Neither may happen, which means it's going to be a long conflict.
I think you, by mistake, you said 11 years, but God forbid. I mean,
11 months.
It reminds me the war in Syria. Of course, we never wish to have 11 years of warfare in Ukraine, but if this goes like this, unfortunately, I'm afraid it's going to be longer, if not 11 years, but probably longer, I'm afraid.
Well, if we go back to actually, now that I said 11 by mistake, but if we go back to Crimea's invasion 2014, it's already 9 years. And if
Right.
you can even go back to 2003 when, we can extend, like you said, I'm a historian too, we can extend that timeline. And but this conflict, right now, it's a hot conflict. It was somewhat of a frozen, cold conflict before. So it will not be settled very soon. I agree with you on that one. That's actually even more reason for NATO and the West to have a more well-rounded policy. What are they going to do about Ukraine? Supplying arms and having them and empowering them to fight against Russians, that's a noble goal. I don't think many have problem with that. But how do we get to peace and as some sort of settlement? That's the harder question, I think.
I think that's the key word. I mean, rather than focusing on war, it is better to focus and talk more about how to earn peace, which is not gonna be easy, obviously.
Yeah, and the military analysts, those who study war, they know very well that you can decide when to start a war, but it is difficult to decide when to end it. So I think we are in this situation. Professor Uğur, Kadir, thank you very much for joining Türkiye Talks. Thank you very much and hope to see you next time.